Hi, thank you so much for joining us today, Pamela. I am just thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you. We've known each other for several years, and I'm going to let you just do your own introduction to this audience, and we'll kick it off there. So, handing over to you.
Hey, Carrie, I'm so delighted to be here today. I mean, it's one, I am so passionate about this work, but I also love any opportunity to work with you. I just think you're great. And so I'm really happy to be here today. I'm Pamela Fierce-Walsh. I'm the Senior Advisor for State Department's Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs. I handle conflict and critical minerals. So I span everything from the Kimberley process to Dodd-Frank 1502, to critical mineral supply chains, and that issue is a national security concern, as well as looking at U.S. Abilities and partnerships overseas long-term and how to source for diverse supply chains. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, Carrie.
So great. You are the perfect person to have this conversation with. So, again, thank you for making this time. I think just to kick off, maybe we can start off with what are critical materials? What are conflict minerals? And just giving like a little bit of perspective of how those are used, because they're both
Mhm.
terms of art as well as kind of anecdotally, we just kind of throw them out. So maybe you
Sure.
can give a little bit more context to it.
Sure. I think maybe just start with a quick clarification, right? So a conflict mineral is not actually a term of art. It's an actual classification under US law. So under Dodd-Frank 1502, which covers, quote, conflict minerals, it requires companies using, quote, conflict minerals that use them in their materials to report to the SEC their efforts on conflict-free supply chains. A conflict mineral under Dodd-Frank is currently defined as tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. So 3TG, as we call them. Now, critical minerals, that does have a little bit more variance about it because every government in the world has a set of minerals they care about, and they're not always exactly the same. There's a lot of overlap, but they can diverge. In the case of the United States, our critical minerals list consists of 35 things declared by the US Geological Survey as ones that are critical for US national security and our economy. And it includes the 3Ts. So when you're talking about critical minerals, you are talking in large part about some very important conflict minerals, but they're a subset. And I should note here that a rare earth is a critical mineral, but not all critical minerals are rare earths. I always need to make that distinction for people. So I'm sure your learned audience will get that, but just so we're super clear. And gold for the United States is not a critical mineral. It nonetheless has a lot of attention on it because its supply chain has a lot of problems for finance, environment, human labor, et cetera. There you go.
That is incredibly helpful. Thank you, Pam, for that clear classification and differentiation between these. Maybe we can start off with then taking critical materials, since that's the larger umbrella term, and let's talk about what it means in the United States for these 35 that were part of a recent executive order, and maybe you can kind of give more detail about that.
Absolutely. So in December of 2017, the president signed Executive Order 13953, which one instructed the Department of Interior, which includes the US Geological Survey, to come up with the list of critical minerals, and then to assemble a federal strategy pursuant to that list of minerals and how to lessen US reliance on those sources from overseas. It's real, that executive order really at its core is about improving domestic access and capability in the mineral and mining space. So you've got taskers there. We call those are assignments in the government for, say, the Department of Interior to look at permitting, or the US Geological Survey to look at mining and education and how we do that in the United States. And then, or the Department of Energy, which has a really big role to play in development of kind of advanced technologies. And then the Department of Defense even has its own separate set of extensive and expansive authorities related to minerals, because the DoD has such a specific need in its supply chain. But in that executive order from 2017, you'll find the State Department isn't even mentioned. But it does nonetheless require us to work with international partners and allies, because in some of these cases, the United States doesn't have immediate access to these materials or to these minerals or to the refining capacity. And so it's focused on shoring up that domestic aspect, but still reinforces the need for international. So I came along and I said, guys, we need international partnerships. Hello. And I've been a very busy woman ever since.
I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. Maybe
Yeah.
you can talk a little bit about sort of how you're engaging internationally with the private sector and how others could, support this effort, and maybe a little bit also of how the U.S. looks at critical materials and maybe how Europe does.
Right. So, really good question. So, before that executive order was signed in 2017, State Department and my team in particular was really engaged with the conflict mineral set, which brought us right together with smelters and refiners and the downstream companies that rely on these products for their commodity or for their products, right? So, the tech companies, the auto companies, the jewelry companies, the aerospace companies, the medical technology companies, those industries were very interested in how they could be a part of conflict-free supply chains. When the critical minerals policy set kind of started to evolve to have a geostrategic lens or a supply chain diversification imperative around it, we knew immediately that it was important to partner closely with US allies and partners to ensure that mutual perspectives on important issues were being achieved in each of our different spheres. So as the White House had publicly announced a few years ago, we established a working group with and critical minerals bilateral dialogue with our partners in Canada. So through Natural Resources Canada, we have an active and robust set of working groups. We engage with interagency partners in the US to kind of match up with their counterparts in Canada to make sure that we're really syncing policies and decisions. And then we have a similar setup with the government of Australia. Another producing country that's a close partner of the United States that sees value in supply chain diversification as a means of security, as well as just a means of good business sense, right? I mean, it's never a wise move to have everything consolidated in any particular specific location, right? And I think COVID has taught us that, right? You need supply chains that are nimble and you need to know what's in them. So all of the supply chain tracing kind of lexicon from the conflict minerals world is really applicable in the critical minerals sense, even though you're not necessarily talking about rooting out conflict minerals in every commodity. You still want to know what's the process, who's my partner, where's it coming from, who's buying it, what's it used for. And knowing that information empowers every aspect of the supply chain. It just does. And it's going to continue to be very important as we move forward. Now, partners in other countries, say the European Union or in Japan, they have very similar and overlapping interests, and they're very good partners. The European Union just put out its very impressive critical minerals strategy, raw material strategy, and their colleagues at DG Grow and DG Trade, my colleagues in those places, are really inspiring in their long-term vision for how they envision reaching Europe's kind of clean energy goals in this space. So there's a lot of overlap and a lot of compatibility in how these particular partners work. We've also got really interesting stuff happening with partners in Latin America, as well as through our Prosper Africa initiative, which is designed to increase US investment in critical mineral, well, Prosper Africa generally is designed to increase US investment on the continent of Africa, but we've established a mineral sector support team that's really intended to kind of improve how we can bring minerals projects to bear. it's a lot going on, and it's a really busy space, but it's a very exciting one. And I really also have to mention the State Department's Energy Resource Governance Initiative, handled by my colleagues in the Bureau of Energy Resources. It's a fantastic initiative that they've put forward that's focused on critical energy minerals. So the subset of critical minerals plus a couple others that are really important for stuff like clean batteries or you know, uh, I'm thinking greenhouses, not greenhouses, solar
Yeah.
panels. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, solar panels. And it's a multilateral initiative that brings international partners together to basically sign up for standards that are elevated in the mineral sourcing space. So very exciting stuff happening.
This is incredible. That was just a load of information that we are going to dice out, and we'll get links to everyone who's listening. And so we'll make sure we parse that out so everyone has the information. But as everyone can see, Pam is just a wealth of information. And this is why we were so excited to have her in this interview. Maybe you can also just do a dive on US conflict minerals legislation versus what the EU is putting out on, it's now
Right, right.
implementing their own. And how does that compare and contrast? And, just as an overview, because I think that is something that people still get a little wrapped around the axle in terms of how they need to differentiate that.
Right. So again, conflict minerals, subset of critical minerals. Conflict minerals under Dodd-Frank 1502, which remains US law for anyone asking, for Dodd-Frank 1502, pertains to the 3TG coming out of DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, or any of its 9 neighbors. And that requires reporting to the SEC if you're a listed company on if your product has those commodities in them as material to the product. Okay, you have to report on those minerals reporting efforts. The European legislation, which comes into force in January, covers the same minerals, so same 3TG. However, it is global. It's global for application in areas considered conflict or high risk. Now, why is that important? Just like with Dodd-Frank, the EU legislation is a proponent of the OECD due diligence guidelines for sourcing minerals from conflict affected and high risk areas. So US legislation focuses just on that one CARA, we call it. The EU legislation, however, requires that no matter where you've sourced it, if you've sourced it from a place that's considered to be a CARA. Now, there's a little bit of a rub there because the EU has not yet published a list of what it considers CARAs. That's a tricky spot for them to be in, I can imagine, because you don't want to call out one place and forget to highlight needs on another place. I think the spirit behind their legislation is not to identify go and no-go areas where you can source from. That's never the intention behind due diligence. It's about ensuring that where you do source, you're not contributing to the problem. According to the due diligence guidelines. And so with the EU, I think there's still going to be a little bit of that like ambiguity. Now, their legislation requires importers of those materials to do the reporting, and they have to be audited against a number of certified audit mechanisms. So I know I say this without endorsement. I just know some of the ones that they've looked at are like, the Responsible Jewelry Council's audits or the Responsible Minerals Initiative's audits. So those are tools that the European Union will say these are some of the ones that are approved. You have to use one of these if you're importing. So the regulatory weeds are a little bit different, but those are the general thrusts.
This is excellent. Thank you so much. Maybe as just a closing, are there other ways that people could learn about this or that they should be reaching out that you would recommend, or other information that you would like to throw out before we close?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that I think this issue is, again, fascinating and one I'm passionate about, but we're just scratching the surface on the extent of the solutions we need to bring to bear to the problem, right? So I've mentioned a few of them. I've mentioned Department of Interior, I've mentioned USGS, both of whom have great websites with lots of resources on them. But you also need the Environmental Protection Agency, which we work with on recycling, or you need even more engagement from the Department of Energy to look at advanced recycling. You need DoD to bring supply standards into their procurement regs, right? Like so much happening in this space from so many different parts of the government. So I'd be the first to say that we don't really have a centralized belly button as yet on it. And that just is what it is. If you ever have questions, please reach out to me at the US Department of State. This is what we work on all day long. I can get you in touch with anybody that you think might be helpful for your needs. And we would really love to hear from you. So Carrie, feel free to give my email address to your audience, and I hope to hear from you, whether you're private sector, public sector, think tank, NGO, private sector company, you're upstream, middle stream, downstream. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks a
The
lot.
whole kit and caboodle.
Everybody.
That's excellent. Well, thank you again. Good luck with the rest of the year. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll be in touch for sure.
Thanks so much.